Now on to Serbia and Kosovo. At the start of April, an NGO, International Crisis Group, published a report taking stock of the situation in the north of Kosovo in the context of Serb minority rights, their relationship with Pristina, their relationship with Serbia, and Kosovo's relation with the EU and the US. Now, the report has given an overview of the situation, the arguments of both sides, what the EU and the US are saying, and it suggests possible ways forward. Now, it focuses on the Serb minority in the north, the incidents that have plagued the last 2 years, and the attempts by international allies to mediate. But I do have a few questions about the findings of this report. I invited the Crisis Group's senior Western Balkans analyst, Marko Prelec, to discuss them. Marko, welcome to Inside Albania. For those watching who've not had a chance to read your report, I'm wondering, can you give us an overview, as briefly as possible, but an overview of the report, its aims and the main findings and recommendations and outcomes, please?
Sure, and thanks for inviting me here. The report is about the Serb minority in Kosovo, and specifically the ones who live in northern Kosovo, which is a very heavily Serb majority area, about their relationship with the Kosovo government, and also about the bilateral relationship between Kosovo and Serbia. The conclusion, the sort of headline message that we have is that Pristina has been winning the battle, so to speak, to integrate the northern Kosovo Serbs and to bring them under its authority, and to integrate them into the broader Kosovo administrative state, something that it's been struggling to do ever since the Republic declared its independence in 2008, so 16 years now. So that is happening on the one hand. On the other hand, we fear, although it's too early to say this definitively, but we fear that the signs are that Kosovo is losing the war for its own integration into the international community, insofar as that goes through a resolution of its dispute over its independence with Belgrade. The Kosovo Serb minority is one of the, and possibly the main, keys to unlocking the broader Kosovo-Serbia impasse. And insofar as it ceases to be a factor through immigration, predominantly immigration, demoralization, brain drain, it will be very difficult for future administrations in Pristina and Belgrade to find a way to reconcile. And what we really call on Pristina to be generous to these people. They are a very highly vulnerable minority that it is now responsible for, and that's our headline recommendation. Be nice to them.
My first question, and I'm glad you said it again. You used the word battle and you used the word war, and I don't know what because you used this on Twitter as well, and I feel that this rhetoric of sort of fighting, conflict, why use those words when we're talking about this situation, which is highly volatile, and everyone really has an interest in keeping from getting more volatile?
Yeah, it's just a metaphor, really. It's just a neat metaphor, and the implication really is not that it's a military confrontation. It's that there's a smaller thing that's going on that the Kosovo is succeeding in, and a larger thing maybe in the background that it's failing at. That's really all that we were trying to say. There is a militarized component to this, though. There has been violence. There has been loss of life in northern Kosovo over the course of last year, and there is some possibility that it could happen again.
Yes, this is a concern. Now, I want to talk about the Serb minority. Of course, there are issues with the Serb minority and how they integrate within society. A lot of them do not recognize Kosovo as a sovereign state. They recognize Belgrade. We know there is pressure coming from Belgrade on them as well. Maybe there is also pressure coming from Kosovo. But from what I understand, if you read the Kosovo constitution, minorities in Kosovo are some of the most well protected on the European continent, particularly Kosovo Serbs as well, in terms of getting access to healthcare and schools. They had free electricity, not having to pay so many taxes, having designated seats in parliament, in the municipalities, in the police. You know, there's a whole range of, and I see this, you know, Kosovo is being pressured. You have to give them more rights. You have to do this. But what else does Kosovo need to do?
Yeah, that's true on paper. They do have, really a very generous set of rights that were assigned to them by the international process, led by Marti Ahtisaari, that led to Kosovo's independence. And it was kind of a quid pro quo. You know, you'll give the Serbs these rights that you're not really keen on giving them, and in return, we will back your independence. A lot of those rights are either not implemented in ways that make any difference to your average Kosovo Serb. So if you start with political representation, which you mentioned, yeah, they do have a disproportionate number of seats in the Kosovo Assembly, but and this is actually not the fault of any Kosovar actors. It's the fault of Serbia. Those representatives are de facto chosen for them by the government in Belgrade, and they represent the interests of Serbia, not of the Kosovo Serbs. And increasingly over the past few years, the Kosovo Serbs have lost faith in their own representatives. So that's one thing. They do have the right to schools in their own language and to healthcare. However, those rights are not implemented. Instead, the schools they have are schools that Serbia operates technically illegally on Kosovo territory. So it's not quite the same.
We saw the attack. The EU called it a terrorist attack in the north of Kosovo on the 24th of September. And I noticed the report didn't call it attack as well. It called it a clash between police and Serb paramilitaries. But I think this serves as a clear example of what can happen, you know, and what can go wrong. Now, the EU has. I mean, the Kosovo government said they've given a report to the EU, all the evidence that they collected. The EU said they haven't had a report. Nothing's really happened. I mean, it's going to be a year since the attack before we know it. What importance do you think this incident has in relations? And do you think the EU are doing enough to sort of deal with the consequences of it?
That has been a turning point because it swung, I mean, up until that point, there was a lot of European and indeed also American sympathy that had accrued to the Kosovo Serbs, because of the increasing pressure that they were under from the government of Kosovo ever since Albin Kurti and the Vetëvendosje party came into power. That evaporated overnight when it became clear that there were these preparations for some kind of armed insurgency involving, attacks on Kosovo police who, were legally operating up there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So immediately people said, okay, we now have no choice but to support Kosovo's efforts to use its police and its highly provocative special police forces in that territory.
But nothing's happened. It's months later. Serbia has not been, the EU won't even talk about it. You know, we were promised that following their assessment of the final report and the investigation conducted by the Kosovo authorities, there would be there were measures drafted against Serbia, but nothing. Now, if I contact the EU about this topic, they don't reply. They do not even respond to comments. Why is this happening? Yet they're so harsh on Kurti, rightly or wrongly aside.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. Look, I'm not in a position to interpret the EU's actions, so I think it would be unfair for me even to try to answer that. I guess what they're trying to do is calibrate their statements and their actions to what they best believe will lead to a good outcome.
Calming the situation.
Calming the situation. That's probably what they're trying to do. Whether they have the right mix or not, I can't really say.
In the report is mentioned the Serb boycotts of the government institutions. Now they walked out of institutions, they resigned, they refused to then take part in elections. Belgrade asked citizens not to vote. Then there was an election with a very small turnout. Albanian mayors were voted in. They refused to accept them. There was the protests, the confrontations. NATO peacekeepers were hurt. Then they demanded they were removed and they called for new elections. This now appears to be happening. And now they say, They're not going to take part. I, at the moment, I feel a bit lost. You know, what are these people speaking for actual Kosovo Serbs here? Is this what they want? What do they want in this process? Because it seems they've called for XYZ. XYZ has happened, and then they're saying they're not going to take part. And in the census as well. It's in their interests.
I don't blame you for feeling baffled. It is baffling. There is an important bit of background here, which is that in northern Kosovo, the population broadly has not wanted and still does not want to engage with Kosovo politically. Okay, so they don't want to vote in Kosovo elections. They want Serbia to come back. Okay, that's what they want. It's not going to happen. So they basically, up until November of 2022, when the Serb representatives and officials, police and lawyers and judges and everyone who was working in Kosovo institutions, when they all resigned, they were not told to do that by Belgrade. They had been asking to do that for months and, in fact, possibly years. And they were finally given a green light to do that. So it was something that they wanted to do. They were then told to come back, again by Belgrade, and they agreed to do so. And then for some reason, which I cannot really speculate on, they've now pulled out. Probably it has to do with the technical, the onerous technical procedures that the government has chosen to use for the recall referendum. There is a big problem, and this is not.
But they can't just call a vote like that for no reason. There has to be.
The problem is that there is an obsolete voting register. So there's a ton of people who are on that register who do not exist anymore. They've either died or moved away. That normally would not be a problem, but because the regulation that Kosovo has put into place requires a turnout of more than 50%, it is very, very difficult to reach that turnout. So even if if in fact well over half of the people who are there turn out to vote, it will be registered as less than half because there is this obsolete voting register, which exists in other countries. So it's, I want to emphasize, this is not something that was done to screw over.
Let's think of the Albanians in southern Serbia who've been removed from the voting list and can't vote. Do you see that there's a big discrepancy here?
That is something that Serbia has been doing to increase pressure on its own even more vulnerable and smaller Albanian minority, and that absolutely needs to be called out and criticized. So yeah, that's true.
I have one more question, and this is slightly different from the report, but I wanted to ask your expertise on it as someone who knows the region very well. I saw yesterday that President Vučić was in France and that they are working on a deal to purchase jets from the French government. I then saw that Dodik was in Paris as well. And I was thinking, okay, there's something going on here. Why are both of these characters in Paris at pretty much the same time? And what I found really interesting was Serbia's announcement that it's going to switch to buy fighter jets from France, whereas before it was buying a lot of military equipment from Russia. And I'm wondering, what's going on here? There has to be what's France doing? There's some deal going on here, and I'm sure the EU is involved. Did you see this news? Do you have any thoughts on what might be at play here?
Yeah, this is not. I've seen it, and I'm as curious as you are. I think this is not new. So Serbia has been interested in buying Rafale jets from France for some time. This is part of Serbia's sort of policy of neutrality and balancing. So they buy some things from China, they buy some things from Russia, they buy some things from Western sources. Serbia is under no illusion about where it is geographically. It is surrounded by an unbroken belt of NATO countries. So it is difficult, if not impossible, for it at this point to continue doing business with Russia, just because it's geographically impossible. They also are aware, and this is off the topic of our interview today, of intensifying Western pressure on Milorad Dodik, the leader of the Bosnian Serbs. So there presumably is lobbying going on in France and other major European capitals as we speak with regard to that.
I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in those meetings that went on. Marko, we're out of time. Thank you for being a good sport with the questions, and thank you for your report.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.